Well, welcome everyone to our members community meeting for July 2016. Do I have control here?
Yes.
I guess it likes to take its time. So these meetings are brought to you each month by our member committee and our communications committee. Myself, Susan Keenley-Side, Carl Vayette, Eric Poirier, and Claudia Cositorto. If you have any questions or concerns or ideas or anything you'd like to bring to our attention, please use the email address information at ibc-bsc.ca. Our topic today is the IFC Exporter tool for Autodesk Revit. We have two gentlemen from Autodesk, Frank Moore and Ivan Jaramillo, as well as Greg Schleusner from HOK, who will show us some project examples of this tool in use. Pour notre communauté francophone, on voulait que vous restiez en ligne après la présentation. Puis on va traduire ce que vous n'avez pas compris. Sentiez-vous bien à l'aise de poser vos questions en français? On va les traduire ensemble. Puis merci beaucoup pour votre collaboration. Aujourd'hui, on a seulement des présenteurs en anglais des États-Unis. Fait que ce n'est pas une option de tout faire en français cette fois. If you're not familiar with the GoToWebinar setup, you are all muted. You can raise your hand or type in a question in the question comment box. Certainly at the end of the session as well, we will be fielding questions, and we encourage you to type that into the question box or comment box. And anytime throughout the presentation, you can do that as well. So a small update to our community. We're up to 287 members across Canada, with some internationally. Our affiliate program is still growing. We are proud to now have the Edmonton BIM community on board. And we should soon have the Toronto BIM community on board, as well as starting up our affiliate advisory committee that will continue to look at how we can best support our local user groups. Altogether with the goal of building a national network of excellence for Canada's built environment. So on today's agenda, we have approximately 30 minutes allocated for Autodesk. They're going to speak on their support of standards and specifically IFC, give a high-level overview of IFC capabilities in Revit with a quick demonstration using the tool. And then we'll switch over to Greg at HOK with a bit of discussion and looking at examples of how HOK leverages IFC for real projects. And then we'll finish with our question period. And with that, we turn it over to Frank Moore of Autodesk. Frank, thanks for joining us today.
Great. Let me see if I can get to my slides. Can you, yep. You guys see my screen now, Susan?
Perfect.
All right, well, thank you, Susan, for the opportunity. I'm Frank Moore with Autodesk. My colleague Ivan will be doing a quick demonstration later, so we're very happy and delighted to participate with Building Smart. We participate in Building Smart chapters all over the world, trying to help get the message out about what we support with IFC and sometimes, more importantly, what we don't support, so we can manage expectations. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Just a little general information about our support for standards in the industry, a little background on his perspective on IFC. I've got a couple examples of some North American owners, the kind of contract language they put in their deliverable language around IFC. Ivan's going to show you a little bit about a little brief tour through the IFC capabilities of Revit. And the other thing I want to say is, and I say this every time I do a customer presentation, this is the only time the Building Smart Canada community can get help from Autodesk. I'm going to remind people that with your Autodesk subscription or your maintenance plan, you are entitled to product support. So if someone is struggling with an IFC issue, there is a front door way to get a hold of Autodesk. You can always talk to me or Ivan, our team, and we'll escalate. But there's a built into your maintenance plan or subscription with Autodesk is a basic level of support. So let me go on with just explaining some basics from the Autodesk perspective of the industry foundation classes. I think I first started going to these meetings myself about 12 years ago, and I was a little bit scared when I first started going to these meetings, but because they're all very technical, even though I am an engineer by training. But I think if we keep it simple, it helps people understand what the standard is trying to accomplish. So Autodesk, I think, as people know, we realize the importance of data interoperability even with our just our heritage with the DWG. It's very important to let people freely exchange data. It's very important in design and construction, and we know from some of the BIM projects that I remember the Yankee Stadium project where there was Turner Construction, there was something like 7 or 8 different file formats, 18 different applications used for the various specialty contractors and disciplines for that aggregate construction model. So there's a lot of heterogeneous data in a construction project, so Autodesk recognizes that, and we really want to make sure that for full BIM adoption, all of this data has to work together, and that's a lot of what you've seen us do even with the Revit product line, is trying to extend Revit into fabrication, recognizing that interoperability is key. So really, IFC, it's a simple definition. It's just a platform-neutral data exchange format for transfer of 3D geometry and attribute information. I think Greg might touch on this later during his presentation, but it's really a 3D standard only. I sometimes like to make analogies. It's like a souped-up DXF for 3D is a great way to oversimplify it, but basically a way to get data from one system to another. This is developed and maintained by the vendor-neutral Building Smart International operation. And there's various chapters, but Building Smart International is the technical arm that does all the testing and certification. And this is a very commonly used collaboration format, especially in design and more so now in construction with the major disciplines. And then as of today, there's about 150 software applications that growing across the world that actually support some level of IFC in their products. And then one of the interesting things is that Autodesk is actually very, very involved with Building Smart, both international and as many chapters as we can across the world. We're involved with the Strategic Advisory Committee, and we also sit on some of the standards committees. Our head developer, Anil Velez, is also very involved in a lot of the technical working groups on working with vendors to figure out how to expand and comply with the standards around certification. The other big news is there were some issues with IFC quality. That was one of the big problems with Building Smart, was there were some issues with IFC data exchange. There were some real technical issues, some limitations. There was also some information just where people had different expectations of what the standard does. But this new recent certification completed a couple of years ago is Coordination View 2.0. It's actually a more rigorous certification, and Autodesk is one of the first wave of vendors to get that done with all 3 flavors of Revit. The other thing we've done is Autodesk is actually a leader in IFC. We'll say that without apology. So we actually included IFC 4 capabilities in Revit 2016. We are waiting on Building Smart to have a certification available for IFC 4. We do maintain the most IFC certifications of any vendor in the Building Smart community. And then the other thing we did recently, recognizing that, especially as you see, a lot of different governments across the world have actually maintained their own variant view of the IFC coordination view. So we've actually made an open source version of Revit, and I'll talk more about why we've done that, but that allows us to crowdsource improvements in the standard, especially if people want to expand it around more data types for construction, things like that. The thing I'm going to say is really, I think there was a comment leading up to that, is people don't realize this, but Autodesk was actually founded on interoperability. I think I've been around Autodesk a long time, but it wasn't that. I remember the days where if you wanted to do CAD CAM, I started a place called Computer Vision. You had to actually buy a proprietary piece of hardware to run your software, and so Autodesk was the first ones to sort of run on PCs, even open systems. We also, radical at the time, we released DXF, which was an open way for any other vendor to read and write and get data into our flagship product, AutoCAD. The other fact is, this was Building Smart. It was formerly called the International Alliance for Interoperability, and we were one of the founding members of that back in the 80s. So we've really been heavily involved. And then is a little cartoon that did by our marketing department on how IFC can work as an example of a school a client or an owner, contracts to get a design for a school. Perhaps they hire an architect, they've got a concept model, and then they want to take that model forward and actually detail it out to a detailed design and eventually construction. And the way this workflow works is they can, if the next vendor in the life cycle of this project is not using the same BIM authoring tool, they can bring in an IFC file for coordination purposes and start to roll into disciplines. Now, I will say that if, and I've seen this happen on other projects, if, let's just look at this example here, right? There's this three thing. Let's say that there's architecture, structure, and MEP all working on this building model. And let's say they're all doing it in Revit. We would strongly recommend that rather than communicate via IFC, if these three major disciplines on the project are participating with Revit, it is better to share the binary RVT file than the IFC file. But this is the case where it's a multi-vendor, heterogeneous set of data sets because, Revit to Revit collaboration is much better. It's almost like I equate it to like if I'm working with if I have a Word document and I make it into a PDF, I'd rather collaborate, but I wanted to make changes, I wanted to do stuff, I'd rather have the source data. So if you have and I'll talk more about that with what some governments are doing around what they ask for in deliverables, but this is meant to collaborate. You'll see this in action. So we'll just, I'm going to go on the next slide. You'll see that with both some examples from what Ivan's going to show you and what Greg's going to talk about. The other thing is we got a lot of products that support IFC. Even our Autodesk 360 viewer can bring in IFC files. I think everyone's familiar with Navisworks, and to oversimplify what IFC is doing, Navisworks does very similar things to what you can do with an IFC-based workflow, but it supports IFC, but it also aggregates in models from multiple sources. So with IFC, though, if you get a single file, it's a lot easier than, because with Navisworks, we have direct translators for several file formats, but it's really this IFC workflow in a open standards, open BIM type approach. It can be pure IFC or a hybrid. And then there's a little bit of history. We've been working on IFC and Revit for a long, long time. Actually, Revit Building 8, we changed the way we named our product at Autodesk about years ago, but it was really, a lot of people think it was the GSA Public Building Service, but it was really the Singapore CoreNet project was the first to really mandate IFC, but around the same time, the GSA BIM program came out, and we were doing Revit. With Revit 2008, we got full extended coordination view certification. In Revit 2013, we introduced the open source version of the Revit IFC. We've added basic IFC export in Revit 2014. There's another feature we'll talk about called Link, where we added IFC linking into Revit in 2015. And then our import link was actually certified in Revit 2016 this year. And there's a lot more things. So we've been working on this, and we continuously invest in so we even added, actually, just this happened recently, we've added IFC support to the Autodesk Inventor product for people that are doing building product manufacturers that want to take some representation of a manufactured component for building and have some representation in a Revit model as a BIM object. We're doing on time here. I got to not take up too much time. And then the other thing we want to say is there's a little discussion about Open BIM. Autodesk supports the Building Smart version of Open BIM, which we call the vendor neutral Open BIM. So the only independent certification process available for this concept of Open BIM today is through Building Smart International. So we support Building Smart IFC certification product because it's a very independent way, and it's not dependent upon one vendor's view of what Open BIM may be. And that what they've done is a lot of automation going on, and we're hopeful that right now Building Smart has just a certification for coordination view, but moving forward into the IFC 4 frame, we hope that there'll be additional model views that can be certified. And one of the reasons we did open source was really that a lot of it was just for us. We're a publicly held software company, and now that we have open source, we can do rapid bug fixes to the Revit platform without any kind of revenue issues. There's all sorts of issues at a public software company when you release software. So we can cram a lot more functionality into the open source version of Revit than we can the one that's built into the product. The main plea we want is we want you folks to use the open source version of Revit. Ivan's going to show you how to get that and how to configure it. And this also gives us the ability to allow others outside of that. Even, I don't know if Greg and his team is there, but if there's stuff that people want to do to the IFC, or they want to have some particular geometry go in a particular kind of way or if some, like we had the government of Korea came up with some new way that they wanted to model view definition, and we were allowed to just quickly modify our existing Revit exporter to accommodate some custom capabilities that people wanted. So it's just but the main thing for this audience is to make sure you configure this, because this is always the most up-to-date, continuously improved version of the that. And if you don't like something we've done, you can go to the open source and change it yourself, and then there's a whole committee for deciding if it goes back into the main product. And if we introduce this, there's 100,000 downloads of this, so it's a very popular too, especially in Europe. We're seeing a lot of downloads. It's IFC is the law in a lot of countries in Europe. These links, I think we'll present these slides, Susan, so you guys can forward them to your members. But this is a couple places where you can get the open source. And the other thing we're doing is, we're committed to continuous improvement of the IFC performance enhancement. And one of the interesting things that to make IFC better, it's not just on the vendors like Autodesk or Graphisoft or ArchiCAD. It's also enforcing the standards. So one of the interesting things this shows is here's a solid object, a boundary representation in IFC 2x3. That's what it looks like. But with the IFC format, that can be smoothed out and a much more accurate geometry. We've also been doing a lot of work on the user interface so people can control what kind of data that they can put in the IFC. There's a lot of different options for how you represent data. In Revit, it's represented one way, but in the IFC file, which way would you like to represent it? Yeah. And then really the IFC linking, which I think we'll show you, is we introduced that in Revit 2015, and this is really the preferred way to bring in data. I know today's focus is more around the export, but the linking is a way to bring data into Revit for coordination. And we found in our testing that import can be problematic depending on what people are trying to do with it, especially round tripping, which is not actually supported by Building Smart. But linking is a way to bring in another discipline's data very rapidly and get very accurate geometry and data for coordination purposes. And so I think, the customers that are using this have found a lot of things. It's faster, quicker, and for 90% of the coordination purposes, this is good enough for some people. There are cases where people want a full import where those actually become well-behaved Revit objects. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the governments that we've dealt with that are mandating IFC. So the U.S. General Service Administration, everyone I think is familiar with their BIM. This was really, it's so funny that the British talk about their the UK BIM standard, but that's rolled out in 2016. A full 10 years ahead of that, 10 to 11 years before that, the GSA Public Building Service rolled out a BIM standard. So you can go to their website and get it. Autodesk, along with the other major vendors, Bentley, Graphisoft, others, we all participated in their open process for the spatial BIM. And this is excerpts from their actual BIM guide. But really, what the GSA was after was just a baby step. They wanted to be able to compute the rentable area, design area, and gross area off of a building. A lot of focus was on their federal courthouses. So they had a specific set of requirements saying we need a BIM model. It must contain minimally these types of elements. And there must be these 7 or 8 pieces of non-graphic data tagged to the spaces, because their whole thing is they're a giant landlord, so they were trying to use BIM to sort of measure the rentable space and track it better. And really, if you look at it, and this is something I want to mention, is they mandated BIM deliverable. They didn't want to mandate what tool to use. We're delighted that the GSA used Revit and if not Revit, AutoCAD architecture on the majority of their products, but they did not want to be in the position of mandating what tool that any particular architect or engineer would use. So they mandated a BIM deliverable plus an IFC file. And this is what we think is a very good way to do it, because we've had cases where a government mandates IFC only, and it's always a good idea to have the source file as well, so that the project goes on hold or goes on source. It's always better to have the native file. So this gives them both the BIM model as well as the IFC version, so they've got a lot of ability to use the data and leverage it. And then the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they've got a very sophisticated BIM program. They're even adding level of detail to it. And they actually historically were mandating only Bentley, and then they decided to do on an open standards approach. So now I think this was probably in about 5 to 6 years ago, they opened up their standard. Now they say they want here's some out of their contract. They've got an attachment they attach to their design and construction projects. And this particular section had submittal requirements. It wanted the CAD and the data files. It also wanted to copy the model in a review format, such as Bentley Navigator, Autodesk Navisworks, Adobe, and they also listed the IFC coordination view as another format they wanted, so that they had all sorts of ways to get at the data if they needed to. You get more interop over there. And what I'm going to do before I turn it over to Ivan, I just want to put this slide up, is a lot of people don't know this, but with your Autodesk maintenance plan or an Autodesk subscription, you get a thing called basic support. So if you guys are current with your Autodesk maintenance, or you are subscribing to an Autodesk product, part of your benefits is a direct link to Autodesk where you can ask us questions, and you can do an email support. We've got other support options where you can get calls from the phone. But if you're having some problem with Revit or IFC, you can actually ask the question directly. Someone will assign a case to it, and they'll get back to you. And in addition, if you the offer we're making to everybody here is if you've got IFC issues and you're having trouble getting through to us, you just holler at myself or Ivan, and we'll get that through. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ivan, who's going to show you this Revit IFC in action a little bit. So I guess we have to switch the control now to Ivan.
All right, perfect. So before I start, I want to just give you a little bit of my background. I come from a construction company, Balfour Beatty Construction. I manage the VDC efforts, the virtual design construction efforts for the Southeast region. I worked there for about 9 years, and I have also construction experience prior to that. So the reason I'm giving you my background is because I'm going to give a little bit of samples of the pain points that we had with sharing information through different software applications to be able to not only coordinate, but to compile information as a handover or deliverable to an owner. So first of all, I'm going to guide you to where you can actually get the extended IFC exporter for Revit 2017. You can find that also the different versions located on the same page. All right, if you want to copy that link, we can also provide you or send you through the messenger. All right, so with the installations, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I would advise to have a Revit closed before you do the installation. You can choose the platform that you want installed. If you have a 64-bit computer, strongly recommend that you use the Win64. And once you download it, the installation is pretty straightforward. It guides you through the entire process. All right, so let me jump into Revit very quickly. So this is a sample model, and first of all, once you download the tool, the first thing that you're going to get are two main tools. The exporter tool for IFC, which is located under Export. Once you click the Exporter tool, it'll bring up a user interface for the exporter, where you can actually select the IFC schemes and the model view definitions that you want. And let me click into modify, and actually I can provide you also with a link where you can get a lot more information on each one of the selections that you can do. So very basic, I'm going to give you just 2 examples. The first sample is the IFC 2x3, the coordination view, which is basically used for coordination. It strips down a lot of information from the model. It just gives you it just exports the IFC common property sets, right? So it actually decreases the size of the file, which becomes a lot more manageable when you're exporting. And also the export's a lot quicker. We're going to run a very quick export on this view for this model, and you'll see how quick it works. And I'm actually running this not from a very heavy configured computer. So you'll see that the data transfer from my computer is pretty quick. Now, in contrast to this, you can also use what's called the extended FM handover, which is the Kobe export for IFC. And you'll see that it'll export additional information attached with the IFC, which also includes quantities and schedules as property sets. All right, very, very quickly also, you can modify also the level of detail of the exports of the geometry exported. In this case, all of this different export sets have a low geometry definition. But you can actually create your own export. Initially, when you're working in the initial process of the design, you can actually set up a plan where you create your IFC export schema based on the requirements for the project and the end deliverable for an owner. So this is extremely flexible, and you can actually select what information to be exported with the IFC. Now, this exporter allows you to export different formats: IFC, IFC XML, and also what's a compact zipped IFC file. All right. All right. Let's do a very quick export. All right. So I'm going to export. Let me open another file here. All right. We're going to export a structural model, a very light structural model, and we're going to export this into an IFC file. All right. We're going to set this export as a coordination view 2.0, which is the new standard. It's the current standard. We're going to select the project that we're exporting. Click on export. And what I'm also going to be showing is that once you export the IFC, we're going to open it. You see, it took about less than a minute. And I'm going to show you how we open this in other model viewers. We're going to talk about importing this into DDS CAD viewer, and I'll show you how the information is transferred from one to another. Once we do this, I'm going to also show you the IFC link in Revit, and we're going to discuss a little bit about how useful it is. Right. So let's open up the model on DDS CAD. Open IFC file. We're going to select the file that we just exported. All right, you see, it's extremely quick. The import is seamless, navigation is seamless, and if I click on any of the objects, I can actually look at the properties that came through the export, through the IFC export. You can see it recognizes the object type, the information, the materials, anything that was exported for coordination, but it strips out the rest of information. If you need additional information, you can use the other exporters or configure your own set. All right. Let's see. Now let's jump back to let's jump back to Revit. So now let's go to the architectural model. All right. So architectural model, very straight and simple. Let's take a look at the IFC Link. Now, I've worked on multiple very large-scale projects with Balfour Beatty Construction, and my recommended workflow here is to use linked files, because eventually you're going to, well, first of all, it's a lot quicker, because it's not going to try to recreate the RBT file when if you import it directly and merge the data into a Revit file, which takes a long time. It will make the file heavy. Just to show you. Just to give you a little snapshot on what I'm saying, this is the size of that same file and I imported that structural file into Revit, and this is the size of a link file. Now, if you're working on large-scale projects and you have to link 5, 6, 7, 8, or 10 files, and those are 1 gigabyte files, and if you start importing those files, the data set's going to be too big and it's going to be too cumbersome to navigate. But if you start linking the file, the data set's going to be a lot smaller and more manageable. So let's do a quick IFC link. We're not going to save this right now, and we're going to select the sample project. Hit open, and you'll see it's also very quick. If I did a direct import, it'll probably take 5 to 10 minutes to do all the conversion from this small model into a Revit model. Now, initially, and once you align the model for the first time, once you run the alignment and you update the links, well, when you get file updates, it's It will keep the location that you set up, so you don't have to worry about that. So every time you get an updated file from either design, it's going to be easy. It's going to be easy to manage that and all those updates. But if you import the file directly, it becomes a lot more of a problem. All right. So that was a very, very straightforward and simple demonstration for the IFC exporter and the IFC link. I don't know if you guys want to take it from here.
Are there any questions before we move on to Greg? Just looking at the attendees. There's no questions here. I just have one question about this setting the project up and making sure that everything is aligned. You said that by updating your link, it'll push back, it'll rewrite over the IFC file, and it'll give it a new set of coordinates. Is that what I understand, or are you better off sort of making sure you have?
No, actually, once you let's say I reposition this model to where it needs to be located. Position, it's very simple. You just move based on the center columns. You do that once, and when you refresh the link, it's not going to move the file from where you set it.
Okay.
Because it's going to now use the Revit coordinate system.
All right, I got that. I guess the question is, if you're setting up your project and you're making sure everybody's using shared coordinates, will that sort of bypass this possible error or issue?
No, it will not, because the IFC import file will not allow you to actually select either shared coordinates. If you're using same coordinate when exporting the structural model, if you're using the same coordinate systems, then yes, it will populate on the same position. But if you're not using, sorry.
I was also saying that independent of the IFC, it's just if you're going to be doing multiple models in a project, is getting your coordinate systems and datums aligned is probably a good idea.
Yes.
Especially with, so he's just showing you, what happens if you get a file that somehow did not have the common datum. But we'll do also more information on. I think we've got a best practices on datum somewhere that we can dig out.
Okay. There's a question about the mapping between Revit objects categories and IFC categories. I don't know if Greg, do you go into that a bit, or Ivan, if you can speak to the mappings between the parameters and the categories and how those export to IFC?
All right. Okay. Yeah. So actually, it does read all those parameters. And actually, I could probably do a selection here, and you'll see how it reads back from the IFC file. Let me just.
I will say there's also been a lot of work that's gone into one of the limitations of the IFC exporter was any custom parameters in Revit had trouble being recognized. So there's a lot of work gone in the last couple of revs in mapping your parameters. Like for instance, we did a Kobe export for IFC, and there was a lot of work around that.
All right. Yes. Isolate element. All right. So to answer your question right now, this is the IFC model that I just imported. And actually, I can navigate to each one of the objects, and you'll see the mapping of the set. It comes throughout seamlessly. The same parameters with all the information contained within those parameters. So I can actually navigate through each one of the object, and it does recognize the IFC material, the floor slabs, and even quantities.
Do you have the structural loaded in that model just to see? Because one of the issues we have is, and our members have, is that a lot of people comment on the fact that the parameters don't translate. And so is it a question of where the parameters, which parameters are actually populated in the file? Because these are written as IFC parameters. Can you can you sort of look at the same object in the Revit file?
Sure.
I think it might have to do with what version. I mean, there's a lot about your export template and what you select on the export. So and there might also be some issues with what version they're using. So,
right.
I think, Frank, fundamentally the piece that the question pertains to is really there is there is no ability to path a particular parameter to populate a Revit parameter.
On the way in, you mean?
Yes, on the way in, or there is a way on the way out to specify where Revit parameters land on the IFC file, but there is no equivalent on the way in.
Right.
You can do object level mapping. You can't do parameter level mapping.
On the import, that's correct.
Correct. And the information that's exported from IFC is whatever you set up on the initial export set. So right now, the version that I selected, it's a stripped down version to just export the IFC common property sets.
Excellent.
So basically, it strips down. This is just remember that this is for coordination purposes. So it strips down a lot of the information that's not required for coordination.
The other thing I would say, though, too, is if someone is importing via IFC to Revit a file that was authored by a Revit application, that would be that is not the most optimal workflow. So if it originated as a Revit structural RVT file and someone exported to IFC and the IFC imported it into Revit, that is not a optimal workflow. It's more of the workflow. It's more like a Teclamata being brought in for coordination purposes of Revit. It is a different file form. But if someone's got Revit files and they're communicating in Revit via IFC, that's not the most optimal workflow. And we kind of that gets almost into the round tripping issue that is not actually supported with IFC.
Mm-hmm.
So we should probably, although longer discussion we should have on this, but I think we're running out of time for Greg here.
Yeah, I'll switch over to Greg. Thank you for clarifying that. I think one of the things is there are best practices manuals that are out there that exist, and we're going to try to get those to our members.
Right.
All right, Greg, and you now have the screen.
Okay, let me know when you see my screen here.
Yep.
Okay, so let me just get started. Sorry, for some reason it's not starting at the first page. Okay, so I'm not going to go too deep, but just to do a quick introduction. So I do work for HOK. I'm the Director of Design Technology in New York. I'm generally not just a Revit or IFSC expert, but I'm sort of all over the place in the design technology space. I don't blog a whole lot. I do like cats, and as a technical topic, it's always good to sprinkle a few cats into a presentation. And this is sort of a deck I use for a live presentation, but the second question I usually get off when I get off the stage is, yes, I know James Van de Zandt, so just solve that one. And if you feel like tweeting anything, that's my address there. Here's your first cat for today. A little bit about HOK, global practice, 24 office founded in 1955. We do nearly every building type. In Canada, we have offices in Calgary, Ottawa, Vancouver, and Toronto. And we work all over Canada in various building types. Just our founders. So just talk a little bit about the workflows we use in IFC. So there's some pretty standard ones that you saw that Frank demonstrate, the sort of the export to view. That top one, the 3D coordination, we typically use Calibri and Navisworks, and we're moving more and more to get away from using. We're trying slowly moving towards standardizing on IFC as the coordination format, and it doesn't matter to us if you use Calibri or Navisworks. We're having to probably do some work on reconfiguring our search sets for Navisworks, but that's generally the idea that we have a singular export process no matter which one of these tools you use for 3D coordination. A lot of the other things we do with IFC just come down to the fact that it's an open format, and we're able to, for lack of a better term, interrogate it in the way we want to use it. So everything below here, maybe save the Rhino to Revit workflows, are pretty custom, and it's only custom because we've done the work of, well, we understand how IFC is structured. We can have a few tools that help us understand how to repurpose some of the information or reconstruct the data to go to non-standard applications. So a good example is we have an urban planning workflow where we have urban planners working in Revit using room objects to do essentially GIS parcels. We use a couple platforms to get that into City Engine and InfraWorks as actual parcels. And that, like I said, is just based on the fact that we have knowledge of how the IFC's file is structured, and one, it's an open format, so we can essentially get the benefit of cracking it open ourselves. Things like using IFC to go to game engines, simply because IFC supports an instancing concept, which a lot of the exporters from Revit, let's say, don't instance things. Brand wrote Revit for just sort of design transfer views, Geometry Gem and VisualArc, and there's some other tools we've investigated. And then we're looking on into Revit, being using City Engine. City Engine is a tool for urban planning again, but using IFC to actually import massing or full-fledged floor plates, and that's again using a IFC and a couple tool workflow. But again, it's fundamentally based on we have a good understanding of how IFC is structured, and we have access to the data behind things. So same information everybody else provide. There's two places you can actually get it, and I think links were provided to both. For no good reason, we simply install the install directly from SourceForge. It's actually the same one that's on the Autodesk App Store. There's no particular difference. I'm going to be showing you in 2016, so my interface will look slightly different. Next cat for the presentation. Export settings. So I'm going to sort of move back and forth between some of these things. The questions I often get are which export settings to use. So I'm going to pop out of this, and I think you'll see similarities in the interfaces. Some of the features are in different spots, but at the end of the day, there are a few custom things that we usually do to make certain that we get the result we're looking for. First off, just on here, on the space boundary side, unless you're doing an energy modeling workflow, most people are confused by what this means. Space boundaries are not the spaces themselves of the Revit rooms. They're actually the boundaries between spaces that are extra pieces of geometry for energy calculations. Those actually take quite a while to export, so in the scenario where you're not trying to do that, we typically do not include those because it's just an extra step, and it usually makes the exports take longer. Early in projects, we'll typically not use this setting for exports, only elements visible in views, but as the project progresses and you have maybe design options in Revit or specific pieces of information that you want to keep out of an export, we begin to use this option. If we do use this and we want to get the rooms, and this is again separate from this setting, you often have to choose the 3D export options, and that's really only because Revit rooms are not inherently 3D objects in 3D views or objects in 3D views, so it's just an option to expose them. And then this option is actually something we found on very large projects, and it might be different in 2017 because Autodesk has been doing work to make the file size limitations on writing an IFC less of an issue. IFC itself has no limitations. It just, you can get some very massive files if certain types of geometries aren't handled well. But we found this option works. If you're going to use this export visible in views, we typically then use this option because you can get the benefits of using coarse views for certain kinds of things, which really, if you're not don't need to show a high level of detail of elements, it's often just better to use this setting to keep file size down and keep things moving. Bounding box is not something that most softwares can utilize, but we do usually include it in our workflows because there's a couple of scenarios, and I'll show you in a second what that looks like. The split levels and columns by Revit. There is a piece that can confuse people here. IFC doesn't have a notion of a parent-child element, which, if you think about it, a wall that's 10 stories tall split into 10 pieces really could be considered a 10-story wall with small pieces. So I'll talk a little bit about the duplicates and the IDs you could get here. Plan view elements, there are certain applications that, apologize for that, that do support those, but it's not, most of the workflows we use don't support it. And then this links is an option that you can use, but on big projects we find it just more efficient to export each file individually. I'm going to just go through these quickly. In Ivan's demonstration, he used one of the coordination views. We find that we're pretty much all the time using just a standard export settings of getting base quantities, getting Revit property sets, and the common property sets. Most people want the Revit property sets simply because it's something that they might be looking for. Ivan, I'm just seeing your notes, so I'm already this far along, so I'll continue sharing my presenter view. Sorry about that, everybody. The base quantities are useful just from a takeoff standpoint if you're trying to interrogate a model. And then finally, the advanced settings. So this high level of detail, if you use, go back 2 slides, if you use this use active view, this will also have a correlation to the level of detail. So if you're, let's say you have a chair, which is often where you see this, that you have multiple representations and you have a coarse representation shown, high level of detail will still give you the detail at a very, well, a high level of detail, but of the coarse representation. So this really comes into play where on export, Revit can't make a boundary representation that's not tessellated, and Frank showed an example of that in the early presentation. I'll show you an example behind the scenes here. So we do a mixed option, parts as building elements. If you're using parts, obviously you want to include those, and then family and type is just useful in reference, just so you can find the family name and type that you're looking for in your settings. So, like I said, this interface is slightly different than others, but at the end of the day, it's a similar set of choices that we typically use. Now, there's reasons to use different ones, but that's just the general items. I'm going to go now into sort of interrogating the actual the GUIDs, because that was actually I think one of the questions that came across very early from the beginning, and this is the one. And fortunately, I'm just not going to take the time. We don't have that much time left, so I'm not going to take the time to switch my presenter view, but let's just talk about this. So Revit has pretty much a very robust way of handling model element GUIDs. So GUIDs are just essentially the unique identifier, so GUID. If I open up one of the viewers that we typically use, this is FME Data Inspector. You can see I have a series of the same models loaded here, and I'm only seeing one of them right now. The first and sort of most high-level piece of information here is the global unique identifier for that. The places that you start to see these things fall apart is when an object gets recreated in Revit. So if people do something as simple as a cut and paste and put it back in the same place, Revit sees that as a recreation of new objects. So if I didn't, let me see, I think I have an example of that. I didn't demo that, but yeah, I actually don't have a demo of that, but that's very straightforward. But if in Revit, if you were to do something as simple as grabbing this odd object, doing a Control X, and then hide this guy. Copy, placed in the same place. I've just made a new thing in Revit. So even though it looks exactly like the same geometry from a Revit's perspective, I've just made a new unique element, and that will then export with a new global unique identifier. Now, from an object's perspective, really that is the only way to break GUID, and by that I mean from export to export. Unless I've done something like that, that object will maintain its GUID. The places where you start to see things not being consistent, and I'm not certain if there's particular questions we can get to, are things that aren't exactly the same in Revit's representation as they would be in an IFC. So a wall is a wall is a wall. That's not a big deal. Or a covering, which is the IFC representation of a ceiling, exactly the same. things like levels, sites, and non-geometric items in Revit, they're places where I can show you here, by comparison, that you start to see these things break. Would be, and this is fundamentally the way that the developer would describe them is if Revit doesn't have a way of describing the IFC entity of a building, then that's something that gets generated on each export uniquely, and it gets generated by the Revit's internal identifier. And so when you start to remake files in Revit as in detach and resave, send to someone and they make a new central or something like that, this is where you start to see these things break, whereas the objects themselves will remain the same because their identifier is based on the Revit ID. So I have this test. So I have test 1 was creating a file, test 2 was making that file into a central, and test 3 was actually me opening the file detached and resaving it. So you see something on this wall. If I click on it, in this version, this GUID is ELUR. It ends in ELUR. If I click on this wall in the central one, you notice it's the same thing. And if I do in the first one, same thing. So it's consistent GUID no matter if I detach the file, made it a central file, and that is really like it represents a workflow of sharing it with a consultant or something like that. The things that would change though, if you click on the building here, so this ends in a 9TXJ. If I look at the one where I made it a central file, you notice it's the same, but because at this last step I actually detached it and made it a brand new file, you notice the actual building itself got a new ID. So there's quite a few scenarios. The ones I'm aware of that have that happen would be something like levels, sites. So there's a piece of geometry that could be the site object. I don't think that would change, but the actual thing called site in IFC would change. And other non-geometric items in Revit like classifications or new P sets or something like that. So we have about 7 minutes left. I just want to open it up for questions or any other process items that I could address for people if they have other things they want to address.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. So are there any questions? I have one raised hand here. I'm going to navigate to it. John, I'm about to, John Dickinson, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Actually, that was a mistake. I was trying to open up the question panel so I could see what was going on.
Well, you can now ask your question if you have one.
I don't have a question. I wanted to see if there were any floating through. I found it very interesting, though. I'm also going to apologize because I have to go and take my son to a doctor's appointment, so it's a timely ending.
I'll mute you. So maybe this is a question for all three of you, and maybe Greg, you can touch on it first. What kind of clients are asking for an IFC deliverable?
Well, to be frank, most of them are non-U.S. government clients, or excuse me, non-U.S. clients, or U.S. government clients. That's the best way to say it. We don't have many private clients in the U.S. that export, but a lot of our European or Asian deliverables are definitely included, including IFC. We do actually a lot of, well, some amount of consulting work with clients as well, and we're sort of advocating a, authoring application plus IFC as well, simply because of some of the workflows that I mentioned that we're doing become available to owners in a way that's, for all intents and purposes, simpler to implement on an IFC file than it would be to have it if you wanted to do something custom around interacting with Revit. It's certainly mostly, well, I saw a large percentage of the international clients, including Canadian clients, are government entities, but there's a lot of other variation out there. I don't know that there's a consistent thing to them besides not really wanting to have vendor lock-in, and having sort of open access to the data is probably the most important part for most.
Frank, where I would add to that, that we are actually seeing a lot more U.S. people ask for COBE, which can be considered a subset of IFC. I mean, but there's a spreadsheet for COBE. There's actually, we're seeing a lot more people asking for COBE deliverables, which is essentially, I did oversimplify it, it's a flavor of IFC, but it can be a spreadsheet or an IFC file. And we do keep track of it, but I think in Europe it's the law. We see the UK BIM mandate is not actually asking, it's asking for COBE, and it's strongly recommending IFC, but it's actually not mandated. It's a misconception that it's IFC only. Some next future version of it might be IFC. But I think we see, I think Veterans Administration asks for the native file, COBE, as well as an IFC. But we actually, you're right, we don't really see a lot of, I would agree, a lot of commercial people. I do think a lot of contractors actually, general contractors, I think, do ask for IFC in the U.S. because they're always trying to interrogate the data for coordination, for drywall, for point layout. So I have seen a lot of GCs that will ask for the native file as well as the IFC because they've got some workflows they do around, I know that around, I think drywall applications where they've got applications they run in Revit that help them figure out studs and things like that. So they think they sometimes ask for an IFC from their subcontractors.
Where and again, a question for all three of you: what are some good resources, to learn how to use IFC optimally? We talked about maybe best practices. I know there's a French Autodesk put out a French best practices Revit to IFC document. Are there any others that are available in English? What do you use, Greg, in terms of best practices or sources for information?
Well, so this is one of the areas that probably needs the most work, I think, simply because, if you're a software vendor, you do a good job of selling your product, and if you're building smart, you tell to everybody what the benefits are of IFC itself. But if you use both, then you're sort of really at the user level, probably looking for resources. And so we've done a few presentations in the past. I think we're probably going to be doing more work through the Building Smart US chapter and the BIM forum to sort of start to do those sort of efforts of putting together research guides to exactly those sort of questions, simply because it does have to be vetted, both IFC and platform adopted. This is postulation. There's not been a real movement on that yet, but that's the general idea I see moving forward, because that organization is quite user-facing. There was a previous question about the adoption, and I think one that this topic points to one of the keys of adoption. And then there's a lot of, in general, there's a lot of misinformation is not the right word, but confused opinions, let's put it that way, on what if there's problems with IFC, it's IFC itself, what IFC is for, differences in vendor implementations of working with IFC itself. So that's one of the challenges that we've even internally have to address with people. Like, people get like, well, IFC doesn't work. Well, it's a much more nuanced topic, and IFC actually just works just fine, and it has all kinds of things that not a lot of vendors support. It's like to the question earlier about parameters and locations, right? IFC has all the parameter data, just in the Revit implementation, it's not remapped into something that people are accustomed to in Revit. ArchiCAD does work that way, and so if you're used to that environment, then you think it's maybe ArchiCAD's capability and IFC lacks it, right? It's sort of the other way in a lot of scenarios. So I think that's fundamentally the biggest challenge in use, and probably the area that needs the most education. And I think we're probably going to have to do some work in the near future to support that.
I have one last question. We're at 10 o'clock, but I have one last question that's coming from Steve Tremblay. Do you know if GSA or USAC have developed their own MVDs to suit their requirements, or do they just ask for deliverables using standard MVDs like IFC 2x3 Coordination View 2.0?
The GSA actually has their own variant model view definition. That's why you see in Revit there's a special option for GSA. So what the GSA did is they created their own. It was around design growth here. So there's actually a special model view definition for GSA. It's a moderate. It's a morph version of the coordination. So GSA has their own. The U.S. Army of Engineers does not. They just use coordination view. And with the GSA, actually, we do have guidance and a template we've put out around that. And so we have some guidance on that. And I do think it just came to my attention that we've got a French document that wasn't translated. I will commit to getting that document translated at best practices. And we are also, Autodesk along with HK, we're trying to work on better messaging. I think because a lot of the problem I see is just because it's getting easier to use this stuff. We've got good documentation, but I think the problem is people are not sure what their expectations are. And so they, for instance, we've got people, this is a true story. Someone let out a contract for a conceptual bridge design in Australia, and the consultant advising the client said to ask for an IFC only deliverable, and actually asked them for Kobe, which is another variant of the IFC, and they did. So the engineer A did the conceptual bridge design in Revit. They sent out a Kobe IFC file, even though it made no sense because Kobe, there are no spaces, and the Kobe for bridges doesn't make any sense. And then, but the client did not ask for the binary, and then they went and hired somebody else to do the detailed design. And rather than getting a rich, RVT model to pick up, they ended up getting just the IFC file. And even Building Smart International will tell you that round tripping is not a supported capability in IFC because things represent the data so differently. I mean, we basically, with Revit, we actually have to, the IFC data structure does not represent all of the parametric relationships we have with Revit between objects. So round tripping is really not a good idea. And I could actually, I've got some documentation on that. And some people get all crazy, like there's a certain part of the world where people militantly want round tripping. And it's like, when you get back to what is the business problem at hand? What is the transaction? Am I coordinating? Am I doing that? So I think we do. And I'm involved in an effort at Building Smart to do just that, where we can try to, assert, what the goal of the workflow is and what the supported workflows are, because I think that is a lot of the confusion. I do think the quality historically has been low, but in the last, as Greg has attested, the quality of IFC from all the vendors has really gone up with the more rigorous certification that's put in place the last few years.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Susan, I'll let you close the meeting, but thank you again for those excellent answers.
Okay, thanks, Eric, and thanks to our three speakers. We really appreciate you coming and presenting to us today. And we'll be sure to follow up with our members through the newsletter on any of the links or the documents that you folks will make available to us. So for our next meeting, we have no scheduled meeting for August. That is our one time that we take a break. We will resume our monthly meetings in September. Our monthly newsletters will continue, so watch out for the next one. And we encourage you to submit presentation requests to our email address below, information@ibc-bsc.ca. So thank you to everyone, and have a spectacular day.
Pour ceux qui, les membres francophones, si vous voulez rester en ligne pour poser vos questions ou parler un petit peu, discuter de ce que vous avez vu, Suzanne et moi pourrons rester là pendant 10-15 minutes, là, autant de temps que ça prendra. Si vous avez des questions, vous avez juste à lever vos mains. Je peux ouvrir les lignes de communication, là.
Well, thanks, Eric, for for always doing the go-to-meeting side of things and running it from there.
All right.
Managing the question period, that's really great. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.